Just take a look at this. This is just some of King's Lynn's rubbish. Every year we throw away tons and tons. Now some of it gets recycled and the rest of it, well, it just ends up in the ground, never to be seen again. But then again, perhaps not. Even rubbish has got a story to tell. Here's Ben Robinson.
It's 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm about to take part in a most extraordinary excavation. Now, most archaeological digs start quite slowly and you have to work quite hard to get the first finds. This one is going to be a bit different because this was the town's Victorian dump.
So what our landscape team at the university has done here is they've plotted this ditch.
Dr. Tom Licence from the University of East Anglia likes nothing better than digging up old rubbish. He's uncovering King's Lynn's Victorian past, and with it, the beginnings of a battle we're still fighting today, the war on waste.
Really today, it's about sampling landfill. There's going to be an awful lot of stuff down here. I mean, we're potentially talking thousands and thousands of bottles and pots and jars from King's Lynn over a 20-30 year period. So we can't really do delicate probing. We want to establish how the site's being used, what's being thrown away, etc.
Tom and volunteers from Norfolk Bottles are often to be found digging up small dumps in back gardens. This is a rare opportunity to record the rubbish of a whole town. It tells the story of how the good citizens of Lynn lived, shopped and entertained themselves. The first few buckets pull up rubbish from the 1930s, but it's not long before we get down to the Victorian stuff.
Oberidge's lung tonic.
So that's Victorian stuff.
Yeah, you can tell because they had what we call aqua colour glass. It's got a greenish tinge to it, and that's a handmade bottle. And the Victorians love their lung tonic. When they analysed Oberidge's lung tonic in 1906, they found that it was 80% ash, 80% coal ash. There was no active ingredient in it. It was a placebo. So it was one of the most popular remedies.
And there was certainly plenty of ash available.
90% of Victorian rubbish by weight is ash from the coal fire.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a lot of ash, a lot of unburnt coal, we call it clinker.
Maybe they needed that lung tonic because of these, the Victorian equivalent of the fag butt.
So this must be, again, an indicator that we're getting fairly early. To find a clay pipe stem like this means that we're probably talking before 1900.
I think you're right. We don't find many clay pipe stems in dumps after 1910, and when you start getting them turning up thick and fast, you know you're in a Victorian dump.
The population of the town doubled between 1811 and 1850, and the number of pubs shot up. More people, more drinking and eating meant more rubbish.
1890, 1900, it's the beginning of the throwaway society. You've got more and more products being sold in packaging, bottles, jars, pots, and they've got nowhere to put it. They just have to put it in the ground. Nothing prepares them for all these products that are suddenly being marketed to people who have more income at their disposal. Up until about 1880, people generated very little rubbish.
So here, you think they took a piece of ground on the edge of town, a piece of wasteland, and just started to fill in ditches. Any hole that was there, they just started to fill it with rubbish.
Well, it's part of a larger land reclamation scheme. Any convenient ditch, any convenient hole in the ground becomes a landfill site.
Dave from the council has come to have a look. This is handy for him because old rubbish once buried can unfortunately carry on being a problem.
You deal with contaminated land at the Borough Council.
Yes,
and
that's
I suppose what's going on here today is of great interest to you.
Yeah, we know that the site had a previous waste disposal use, so any information that we get from today can develop what we already know about the site. Obviously, from our perspective, we're mainly looking at it from impact on human health rather than the social issue that the UEA are looking at. Ash, after being burned, depends what you're burning, but it'll contain a lot of heavy metals, so iron, cadmium, nickel, those sorts of things. Depending on what's been burnt, it's reduced down, and then obviously that's what's left behind, so it's the metals, and they don't degrade over time. So even ash from 100 years ago will still contain levels of heavy metals which could pose an issue.
By lunchtime, we've already got bucket loads of bottles, and they're telling us about trade in the town.
What's striking to me is these have got King's Lynn written on them, so they're actually manufactured and used in the town. They've ended up as landfill probably a mile or two from where they were made.
All of these could have been returned to their makers. They would have been 10, 15 mineral water makers. You'd have got a farthing, a quarter of a penny back for returning them, and they've just made the decision to dump them all in the ground because it's too much bother.
So, this is the beginning of the throwaway society, isn't it? This is the beginning where we just can't be bothered to return bottles or reuse them. They just get chucked in the ground.
You might remember the huge and costly row recently over plans to build a giant waste incinerator just about a mile from here. It was fiercely unpopular and the plans were abandoned. But here's a clue that shows that we realised 100 years ago that burying our rubbish wasn't the answer.
Well, this is the base of King's Lynn's original incinerator. It was called the Destructor for burning rubbish.
The Destructor, what a fantastic name.
Patented by a man called Albert Fryer in the 1870s.
Even better. So, and the idea was, though, that this was an attempt not just to bury the rubbish, but they were actually thinking about burning what they could.
By this point, really, they've got to do something other than bury it, and they start burning it 1928. That's when the plans are set out to build this machine.
Sometimes the things people threw away are the only remaining record of a local shop or a product that's long since vanished.
We've got a local chemist's bottle, and none of us have seen this before. We don't know whether it's the only one to exist, but it tells us elixir pectoral, that's elixir for the chest, some sort of cough mixture, WG Wig, High Street Lynn. And it's a very crude early bottle, probably 1870s.
Okay.
But what's interesting about this is it's a small firm, and it might be the only one that's known.
Great.
But the more recent rubbish we're unearthing is also telling us a story of how all those little shops making their own products start to disappear.
We can see illustrated behind us just how much they've been throwing away, and we can also see the transition from local products to national brands. In this instance, you've got a small firm from Colchester making its own bottles. A little bit later, around about 1900, 1910, you've got a firm here, Morgan's from Norwich, which has about 10 different branches, and they're all listed on the bottom. So you can see a small firm that's beginning to establish branches elsewhere in Norfolk. And right at the very end, you've got these national, indeed international brands such as Bovril. So there's that rise of the brands going hand in hand with the rise of the throwaway society.
So from localism, really, to right the way across the empire. So this has been a real insight into the life of King's Lynn.
The life of King's Lynn, but it's a national picture too. King's Lynn is typical in this respect.
After 2 days rifling through rubbish, I'm left thinking we haven't changed our attitudes very much. Persuading people to recycle was never easy.
Tom, if you could pick just one object to tell the story of this place, which would it be?
Well, I can't really resist this flagon, just because it sums up so much of what we've been saying. It says on the top of this flagon, this bottle is the property of Adcock's Peterborough Limited. And then it says on the bottom, anyone illegally using or detaining will be prosecuted. Obviously this bottle was meant to be returned to the manufacturer, and yet it's perfectly good, it's still got the stopper in, and someone has just made the decision to throw it away.
So there we go, the beginnings of the throwaway society.
This is the throwaway society breaking the law.